I woke to the taste of copper and citrus, a strange electric warmth on my lips, and the unmistakable sensation that I had just made a catastrophic mistake. My eyes snapped open. The ceiling above me was not the dull white of a human infirmary, but a vaulted dome of living crystal, pulsing faintly with bioluminescent veins. Around me stood at least 24 aliens of half a dozen species, frozen in absolute stillness. Directly in front of me, leaning close enough that I could count the fine fractal patterns in her iridescent skin, was the Queen of the Khepri Accord. And my mouth was pressed against hers. The silence was total, profound, and terrifying. Somewhere in the back of my mind, the words of my diplomatic briefing screamed at me. Do not initiate physical contact with Khepri royalty. The kiss broke as she straightened, her multifaceted eyes widening in something that might have been shock. I scrambled backward on the ceremonial platform, hands raised instinctively. Your Majesty, I'm so sorry, I blurted, my translator implant lagging half a second behind my panic. The silence deepened. Khepri nobles, insectoid and towering, clicked their mandibles softly. A pair of armored guards tightened their grip on electrolances. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might rupture. I had been Earth's lead cultural envoy for exactly 3 days, and I was about to start an interstellar war because I had woken up disoriented from a ceremonial trance and mistaken the alien queen for a nurse. To understand how badly things had gone wrong, you have to understand the Khepri. They were an ancient hive civilization, proud, formal, and bound by layers of ritual so dense that human diplomats needed weeks of study just to bow correctly. The Queen, Xilaria of the Thousand Voices, was not merely a political leader but a living symbol of their collective will. To touch her without permission was unthinkable. To touch her lips, well, no human translation file even had a category for that offense. What none of our briefings had prepared us for was the dreaming. The Khepri initiated new diplomatic partners through a shared neuroceremonial state, a kind of guided lucid dream meant to establish empathy. Humans, apparently, responded to it differently. In the dreaming, memories blurred. Comfort instincts overrode protocol. When I had felt someone close, reassuring, grounding me as my mind swam between worlds, I had done what any half-conscious human might do: sought connection. In human culture, a kiss could mean affection, reassurance, gratitude, or apology, sometimes all at once. I had no idea what it meant to the Khepri. Judging by the deathly quiet in the chamber, it meant something important. Xilaria raised one delicate, bladed hand. The guards froze mid-motion. She studied me with unnerving intensity, her crest fluttering with subtle color shifts that my implant struggled to interpret. Finally she spoke. Her voice was layered, harmonized by a chorus of subordinate minds. "Human envoy," she said slowly, "you have performed an act reserved for the bonded." A ripple of reaction passed through the room. My stomach dropped. Bonded, according to my files, were lifelong consorts to the Queen, bound in ritual and duty. There were usually 3. They were not outsiders. They were not human. "Explain," she commanded. I swallowed hard. Running was impossible. Lying would be worse. So I did the only very human thing I could do. I told the truth, plainly and without ornament, even though it might doom me. I explained confusion, instinct, the way humans use touch to ground one another. I explained that for us, intimacy was contextual, flexible, and deeply tied to empathy. As I spoke, the chamber slowly came back to life. The nobles whispered through pheromone clouds. The guards eased just slightly. Xilaria listened without interruption. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then, astonishingly, her crest shifted to a pattern my implant tagged as amusement. "You are unshielded," she said. Your species carries its intent on the surface of the mind. In the dreaming there was no deception, only reassurance. She stepped closer again, not threatening this time. Among the Khepri, such an act is a vow. Among humans, it is communication. The crisis should have ended there. A misunderstanding resolved, apologies exchanged, maybe my quiet removal from the program. Instead, the galaxy noticed. News spread across the accord at light speed. A human had violated, or perhaps fulfilled, an ancient Khepri ritual without knowing it. Some species laughed. Others were horrified. Few, dangerously, were intrigued. If humans could form bonds without the rigid scaffolding of ritual, if they could navigate emotional space so intuitively, what else could they do? Political factions formed overnight. The Khepri themselves were divided. Traditionalists demanded my execution to preserve honor. Reformists argued that intent mattered more than form. At the center of it all was Xyleria, who insisted I remain under her protection until a conclave could decide my fate. The days that followed were the strangest of my life. I was confined to the Crystal Court, a guest prisoner hybrid status that allowed me access to the Queen but barred me from leaving. Xyleria questioned me endlessly about human relationships, families, friendships, even our wars. In return, she shared fragments of the Khepri hive mind, letting me feel their unity, their crushing sense of collective responsibility. It was overwhelming and beautiful. I began to understand why their rituals were so strict. When you are that connected, boundaries are survival. Yet she seemed fascinated by humanity's emotional chaos, by our ability to disagree, disconnect, and still care. You fracture, she observed once, and yet you endure. The conclave convened on the 7th cycle. Representatives from 43 species filled the Grand Resonance Hall. The charge was unprecedented. Unintentional bonding by a non-hive entity. I was allowed to speak in my own defense. Standing before that assembly, I realized something profound. Humanity's strength was not our weapons or our technology, though both were formidable. It was our willingness to be vulnerable, to act without certainty, to reach out even when we didn't fully understand the consequences. I argued that my kiss was not a claim, but an offering. Not dominance, but empathy. I argued that if the galaxy wanted true cooperation, it would have to make room for intent, not just tradition. The hall erupted into debate. Logic clashed with philosophy. Biology with culture. Last, Xyleria rose. Silence fell again, but this time it felt different. Anticipatory, not horrified. The human did not steal a bond, she declared. He demonstrated one. She turned to me, her eyes unreadable. In the dreaming I felt no conquest. I felt seen. Gasps echoed. A queen admitting such a thing was unheard of. Therefore, she concluded, the charge is dismissed. Let this moment mark not a scandal, but a beginning. I was released, my status revised from envoy to something new. Liaison of intent. Humans, it turned out, became the galaxy's emotional translators. We helped species navigate misunderstandings, soften rigid doctrines, and find common ground where logic alone failed. As for me and Xyleria, our relationship settled into something neither bonded nor distant. We spoke often. We learned from one another. And though we never repeated that first kiss, its echo reshaped interstellar diplomacy. Years later, when historians ask how humanity secured its place among the stars, they don't talk about our fleets or our treaties. They talk about a silent room, an accidental kiss, and the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the bravest thing a species can do is reach out without knowing if it's allowed. The day I finally left the Crystal Court, the sky above the Khepri capital shimmered like a living mosaic. Great winged carriers drifted between spires grown rather than built, and the hive sang, a low, harmonic vibration that I could feel in my bones. I stood at the edge of the departure platform with a small human duffel at my feet, suddenly aware of how much had changed since I'd woken up in silence and terror. I had arrived as an envoy. I was leaving as something else entirely. Xyleria came to see me off without ceremony. No guards, no nobles, just the Queen of the Khepri and a human who had once kissed her by accident and rewritten 1,000 years of protocol in the process. She stood taller than me, as always, radiant in shifting hues that reflected thought rather than mood now that I knew how to read them. "Your species leaves echoes," she said, her voice softer than it had been that first day. "Where you go, patterns change." I smiled, a small, very human expression she had learned to recognize. "We don't always mean to," I replied. "But we try to leave things better than we found them." She regarded me for a long moment, then inclined her head, a gesture that, among the Khepri, was reserved for equals. No words could have honored me more. As I boarded the shuttle, I felt the hive's attention withdraw, not coldly, but respectfully. For the first time, humanity was not an anomaly to be studied or a variable to be controlled. We were a people understood. Back on Earth, the story spread fast. Not the sanitized diplomatic version, but the real one, the awkward, impulsive, deeply human truth. Analysts argued. Commentators laughed. Philosophers wrote essays about vulnerability as power. And slowly, unmistakably, humanity's role among the stars shifted. We were no longer just the newest species at the table. We were the ones others turned to when talk stalled, when logic failed, when pride threatened to undo peace. Because we understood something many older civilizations had forgotten. Connection isn't weakness. It's risk. And risk is where growth lives. Years later, standing in a crowded interstellar chamber as humanity helped broker a peace no one else could, I felt a familiar hush fall over the room. Not the horrified silence of that first awakening, but a thoughtful one. The kind that comes right before history changes direction. I thought of the kiss, the misunderstanding, the courage it took to explain rather than defend. And I realized something that made me quietly proud. Humanity didn't earn its place in the galaxy by conquering it. We earned it by caring, messily, instinctively, and without permission. And the universe, at long last, leaned in and listened.